The Galactic Academy of Unified Species had stood on the crystal moon of Vareth 7 for 3,000 years. It was the most famous school in all the known galaxy. Students came from every corner of space to learn here. They came from planets with 3 suns and worlds made entirely of water. They came with tentacles and wings and bodies made of light. But in all those 3,000 years, no one had ever arrived quite like Danny Cole. Principal Zorth Ken stood at his window and watched the human ship land. He was a Velthari, tall and thin with 4 arms and skin that shimmered like blue water. He had been the principal of this academy for 200 years. In that time, he had seen every kind of student the galaxy could produce. He had welcomed beings who breathed fire and beings who ate metal. He had taught students who could read minds and students who could walk through walls. Nothing surprised him anymore, or so he thought. The ship's door opened, and a young human male walked down the ramp. According to his file, his name was Danny Cole. He was 16 years old by Earth counting. He had brown hair that stuck up in strange directions and a face full of freckles. He wore simple clothes and carried an old backpack over one shoulder. He looked completely ordinary, but he was not alone. Walking beside him was a dragon. Zorth Ken felt all 4 of his hearts stop at once. He pressed his face closer to the window, certain his eyes were playing tricks on him. They were not. The creature was real. She was about the size of a large earth dog, with scales that changed from green to gold as she moved through the sunlight. Her wings were folded neatly against her back. Her eyes were the color of amber, and they looked at everything with sharp intelligence. The principal grabbed his communication device. "Security Chief, report to my office immediately, and tell me why there is a dragon on my landing pad." The security chief arrived within minutes, breathing hard. "Sir, we checked all the documents. The creature is registered as a companion animal. The human calls her Ember. All her paperwork is in order." "A companion animal," Zorth Ken repeated slowly. "Humans have somehow made pets of dragons." "It appears so, sir." Zorth Ken turned back to the window. Down below, a crowd of alien students had gathered around the human and his dragon. Most of them kept their distance, staring with wide eyes and open mouths. Dragons existed only in old records and ancient stories for most species. They were creatures of legend, beings of fire and destruction that had died out millions of years ago. Yet here one was, sitting calmly on the landing pad while a human voice scratched behind her ears. As Zorth Ken watched, something interesting happened. A young Grellian student, a small creature with big eyes and thin arms, dropped her pile of data tablets. They scattered across the ground in front of Danny. The Grellian looked terrified, not of dropping her things, but of being so close to the dragon. Danny bent down and began picking up the tablets. He smiled at the Grellian and said something Zorth Ken could not hear. The dragon Ember stayed perfectly still. She lowered her head and made a soft rumbling sound in her chest. The Grellian's fear seemed to melt away. She actually reached out and touched the dragon's snout. Ember closed her eyes in what could only be described as pleasure. "Interesting," Zorth Ken murmured. He had studied humans before they arrived. He knew the basic facts about their species. They were young in galactic terms, only exploring space for about 100 years. They had no special abilities. They could not read minds or change their shape. They were not particularly strong or fast. They did not live very long. By most standards, they were one of the most ordinary species in the galaxy. But they had one strange quality that set them apart. They formed attachments, strong emotional bonds with other beings, with places, with objects. They called these bonds by different names: love, loyalty, friendship. Most advanced species considered this a weakness. Emotions clouded judgment. Attachments led to poor decisions. The Velthari had evolved past such things long ago. Zorth Ken watched Danny help the Grellian gather her tablets. The human was still smiling. The dragon was now being petted by 3 different students who had found the courage to approach. A Korthan, a species known for their fear of everything, was actually laughing as Ember licked his face. The principal felt something strange in his chest. It was not quite discomfort and not quite curiosity. It was something he could not name, and that bothered him greatly. Zorth Ken did not like things he could not name. He decided he would keep a close eye on this human student. The first week of classes proved even more unusual than the arrival. Danny was placed in standard courses for his age and ability level. His grades were acceptable, but not remarkable. He struggled with mathematics and did reasonably well in xenobiology. He was neither the best student nor the worst, but something strange kept happening around him. Other students wanted to be near him. They sought him out in the dining hall and followed him through the corridors. Species that normally avoided each other would sit at the same table if Danny was there. Arguments that had been brewing for days would suddenly resolve themselves when the human walked into the room. And always, the dragon was at his side. Zorth Ken watched through security cameras as Ember played with students between classes. She would chase thrown objects and bring them back. She would lie still and let nervous students touch her scales. She would make that deep rumbling sound in her chest, and somehow, everyone who heard it felt calmer. "What are you?" Zorth Ken asked the image on his screen. He was not sure if he was asking about the dragon or the boy. On the screen, Danny laughed at something a Veshan student said. The Veshan's skin flashed with patterns of light, their species' way of showing emotion. The patterns were bright and fast, which meant happiness. Pure, simple happiness. Zorth Ken touched his own chest, where his 4 hearts beat in their steady rhythm. He could not remember the last time he had felt happiness. He was not sure he ever had. The Velthari did not believe in such things, but watching that human boy and his dragon, surrounded by students from a dozen different worlds, all of them laughing and talking and touching each other without fear, Zorth Ken began to wonder if perhaps his species had made a mistake somewhere along the way. He added more notes to Danny Cole's file. This situation required further study. 3 months passed at the Galactic Academy. Zorth Ken kept watching Danny Cole. He filled an entire data storage unit with notes and observations. The more he watched, the less he understood. It started with Danny's roommate. The Academy had assigned him to share quarters with a Veshan named Vok. This was considered a difficult assignment. Veshans were solitary creatures by nature. Their bodies were covered with a thin membrane that glowed with different colors based on their emotions. Being around other beings made them uncomfortable. Their light would flicker and dim, showing their distress. Zorth Ken expected Danny to request a room change within the first week. Instead, something impossible happened. Vok began following Danny everywhere. The principal first noticed it in the dining hall. Danny was eating something called a sandwich, which seemed to be his favorite food. Vok sat across from him, his membrane glowing with soft, steady light. They were talking. Actually talking, like friends. How did this happen? Zorth Ken asked his assistant. The assistant checked the records. It seems the humans simply talked to him, sir. Every day. He asked Vok questions about his homeworld. He listened to the answers. He remembered things Vok told him and brought them up later. That is all? That appears to be all, sir. Zorth Ken did not understand. Veshans did not make friends. It was not in their biology. Yet here was Vok, glowing brighter than any Veshan the principal had ever seen. All because a human asked him questions and listened to the answers. The situation grew more complicated when the Korathi students arrived. The Korathi were an exchange group from a distant star system. Their species had been enemies with the Deshans for 600 years. The reasons for their conflict were ancient and complicated. involving territory disputes and religious differences, and a war that had killed millions on both sides. When a Korathi saw a Theshan, they felt hatred in their bones. It was instinct. It was history. It was UNCHANGEABLE. Or so everyone believed. The trouble began when Danny discovered that Vok and a Korathi named Shen had been assigned to the same laboratory group. This was a mistake in the scheduling system that should have been fixed immediately. Instead, Danny did something no one expected. He invited them both to dinner. Zorath Khan watched through the dining hall cameras, certain he was about to witness a fight. His security teams were standing by, ready to intervene. The entire room had gone quiet as Vok and Shen sat down at the same table, with Danny between them and Ember lying at their feet. For a long moment, no one moved. Vok's membrane flickered with dark, nervous colors. Shen's hands were clenched into fists on the table. The hatred between their species filled the air like smoke. Then Danny said something. The cameras did not have sound at that distance, so Zorath Khan could not hear the words. But he saw Danny smile and gesture at the food in front of them. He saw Ember lift her head and look at both aliens with her calm amber eyes. Shen unclenched his fists. Vok's light steadied, and then, incredibly, they began to eat together. By the end of the meal, Shen was teaching Vok a Korathi meditation technique. He moved his hands in slow patterns, and Vok copied him, his membrane shifting to match the peaceful rhythm. In return, Vok was explaining how to read Theshan emotional colors. Shen leaned forward with genuine interest, asking questions and nodding at the answers. Ember had fallen asleep across both their laps. The security teams were sent away. The crisis was over, but Zorath Khan stayed at his screen for a long time, staring at the three students and the dragon. Trying to make sense of what he had seen, he decided to ask the human directly. "Explain what you did," the principal said when Danny arrived at his office. In the dining hall, with the Theshan and the Korathi, Danny looked confused. "I just invited them to eat with me. But why? Their species are enemies. They should hate each other. Well, I figured they've never really met each other. Not as people, anyway. They just knew stories about each other, things they learned from their parents and their history books." Danny shrugged. "I thought maybe if they actually talked, they might find out those stories aren't the whole truth. And the dragon? What role does the creature play?" Danny looked down at Ember, who was lying across his feet. He smiled and scratched behind her ears. "Ember helps people relax. It's hard to stay angry when you're petting a dragon. She makes everyone feel safe." Zorath Khan leaned forward. "How does she do this? Does she have some kind of mental ability? Does she release calming chemicals?" "No, nothing like that." Danny thought for a moment. "She just loves everyone. That's it. She doesn't care if you're Theshan or Korathi or human or anything else. She just wants to be your friend. And when someone loves you like that, without any reason or condition, it changes something inside you." The principal was silent. He did not have a response to this. "Can I ask you something, sir?" Danny said. "You may. Do you have any friends?" The question hit Zorath Khan like a physical blow. He sat back in his chair, all four of his hands suddenly restless. "I am the principal of this academy. I have colleagues. I have staff. I have students. But do you have friends? People who care about you, not because of your job, but just because you're you?" Zorath Khan opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. The truth was, he did not know. He had never thought about it before. For 200 years, he had defined himself by his role, by his responsibilities, by his position. The idea that someone might care about him for other reasons had simply never occurred to him. Danny smiled gently. "It's okay if you don't. Most people don't, not really. They think they do, but they're actually alone." He looked at Ember, who had lifted her head to gaze at the principal. "That's why Ember is so important to me. She taught me what real friendship looks like. And once you understand that, you want to share it with everyone." Zorith Ken stared at the dragon. Ember stared back. Her amber eyes held no judgment, no expectation. She was simply present, offering her attention and her warmth without asking for anything in return. For the first time in 200 years, Zorith Ken felt a crack form in the wall around his heart. After the attack, something changed in Zorith-Ken. He could not stop thinking about what he had seen. 4 students and a dragon had defeated an army of professional killers. They had done it without weapons, without training, without any logical advantage. They had done it with trust and love and a willingness to die for each other. The Valkyrie principal had lived for more than 300 years. He had managed crises and solved problems and made difficult decisions. But he had never seen anything like this. He decided to study the phenomenon properly. For the first few weeks, he approached it like any academic project. He read human books about friendship and love. He watched human entertainment programs that showed people forming bonds. He studied psychological reports and sociological analyses. He filled his office with data and charts and research papers. But the data was not enough. "You're overthinking this," Danny told him during one of their now regular meetings. "Friendship isn't something you can study in a book. It's something you have to feel." "Valkyrie do not feel things the way humans do," Zorith Ken replied. "We evolved past emotional responses many thousands of years ago." Danny tilted his head to one side. "Are you sure about that? Or did you just forget how?" The question bothered Zorith Ken for days. He could not shake it from his mind. At night, when he should have been sleeping, he lay awake and thought about his past. He tried to remember a time when he had felt something other than duty and responsibility. And slowly, like light breaking through clouds, a memory began to surface. He had been young once. Very young, by Valkyrie standards. Only 30 or 40 years old. He remembered another young Valkyrie, a female with silver skin and quick hands. They had spent time together. They had talked about their dreams and their fears. They had explored the crystal caves beneath their home city, discovering new passages and hiding from their teachers. She had been his friend. What was her name? Zorith Ken could not remember. The Valkyrie Collective had decided long ago that emotional attachments were weaknesses. When a Valkyrie grew too close to another being, the memories were gently removed, filed away in the collective archives, never to be accessed again. Zorith Ken had lost his friend twice. Once when they were separated, and once when he forgot she had ever existed. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He sat in his office, surrounded by research papers and data tablets, and he felt something wet on his face. He touched his cheek and found water there. He was crying. Valkyrie did not cry. They had no tear ducts. And yet, somehow he was crying. "I would like to try," he said to Danny at their next meeting. His voice was strange, rough with emotions he did not know how to name. "This friendship you speak of, how does one begin?" Danny grinned at him. It was a warm expression, full of kindness. "First, you have to actually talk to someone. Not as a principal or an administrator. Just as yourself. I do not know how to do that. Then we'll figure it out together." It was harder than Zorith Ken had expected. For 200 years, he had been the principal, the administrator, the decision-maker. When he spoke, it was to give orders or make judgments. He did not know how to have a simple conversation. His first attempt was with his assistant, a young Valkyrie named Tess. She had worked for him for 20 years, and he had never once asked her about her life. "Tess," he said one morning, "what do you enjoy doing when you are not working?" She stared at him as if he had grown a second head. "Sir, I am asking about your personal interests." Your hobbies. The things that bring you pleasure. Tess continued to stare. Then, slowly, she began to answer. She told him about her collection of crystal formations from different planets. She told him about her interest in ancient languages. She told him about the music she liked to listen to when she was alone. Zorth Ken listened. He asked questions. He remembered the answers and brought them up again later. It felt strange and awkward, like trying to walk after sitting for too long. But Thess's light grew brighter as they talked, and something in Zorth Ken's chest began to feel lighter too. He started visiting the student dining hall, not to observe or supervise, but to sit with Danny's strange group of friends. Vok taught him how to read Deshan color patterns. Shen showed him basic Korathi meditation. Myra explained her engineering projects in words he could understand. And Ember was always there. The dragon seemed to understand what Zorth Ken was going through. She would sit beside him during meals, pressing her warm body against his leg. She would look at him with those amber eyes that held no judgment, only acceptance. Sometimes, when no one else was watching, she would rest her head on his knee and make that deep rumbling sound in her chest. Zorth Ken found himself looking forward to those moments. One evening, Danny made a terrible joke. Zorth Ken did not understand what made it funny, but Ember groaned and covered her face with her wing, and Vok's light flickered with amusement, and Shen shook his head with exaggerated disappointment, and Zorth Ken laughed. The sound surprised him. It was rusty and strange, more like a mechanical noise than an expression of joy. He had not laughed in 200 years. He had forgotten it was possible, but once he started, he found it difficult to stop. "You're learning," Danny said, smiling at him. "I am trying," Zorth Ken replied. "It is more difficult than I expected. The best things usually are." That night, Zorth Ken stood at his window and looked out at the stars. The crystal moon of Vareth 7 reflected their light in 1,000 colors. He had seen this view every night for 2 centuries. It had never moved him before. Now, somehow, it felt different. The stars seemed brighter. The colors seemed deeper. The universe seemed less empty and cold. He placed one of his 4 hands over his chest, where his hearts beat in their steady rhythm. For the first time and longer than he could remember, those hearts did not feel like machines. They felt alive. He was not sure if he understood friendship yet, but he was beginning to understand why it mattered, and that, he decided, was a good start. The attack came without warning on a cold night in the middle of the semester. Zorth Ken was in his quarters when the alarm went off. Red lights flashed through every corridor of the academy. The emergency signal screamed from every speaker. By the time the principal reached the command center, his worst fears had been confirmed. The Nexari had come. The Nexari were pirates, the most feared raiders in the galaxy. They attacked ships and stations, stealing technology and taking prisoners. They had no home world, no laws, no mercy. Their soldiers wore black armor and carried weapons that could cut through stone. Everyone in the galaxy knew to fear them. How did they get past our shields? Zorth Ken demanded. His security chief was pale with terror. "Someone disabled the generators from inside, sir. Someone gave them our access codes. We have a traitor in the academy." Zorth Ken felt ice form in his chest. "Where are they now?" "They've taken control of the dormitory complex. All students are trapped in their rooms. Sir, they have hostages. 400 students." The principal closed his eyes. 400 young beings from across the galaxy, all under his protection. All now in the hands of monsters. What do they want? The Leshan research data. The studies on bioluminescent communication. If they get that information, they'll be able to infiltrate Deshan worlds undetected. Millions will die. Zorth Ken understood the situation perfectly. If he gave the Nexari what they wanted, he would doom an entire species. If he refused, his students would die one by one. They say they'll start executing hostages in 1 hour, the security chief continued. 1 student every hour until we give them the data. The principal stood frozen. For 200 years, he had made decisions based on logic and calculation. He had always known the right answer, the correct choice, the proper path. But now there was no right answer. Every option led to death. He was still trying to calculate impossible solutions. When the first explosion shook the building, then another. And another. What is happening? Zorath Ken shouted. His officers scrambled at their screens. Sir, the explosions are coming from inside the dormitory. Something is fighting the Nexari. Something? What something? The answer came through the security cameras. And it was the last thing Zorath Ken expected. It was Danny Cole and his dragon. Later, when everything was over, Zorath Ken would piece together what had happened from footage and witness accounts. When the Nexari soldiers broke into Danny's room, Ember did not attack. She whimpered and cowered behind the bed, acting like a frightened animal. The raiders laughed at her. They thought she was harmless. They were very, very wrong. As soon as the soldiers turned their backs, Danny began to plan. He gathered his friends. Vok was in the room next door. Shen was down the hall. A Grellian engineer named Mira lived 3 floors up. Danny contacted them all through a communication system that Mira had secretly built weeks ago. Just for fun. None of them hesitated. None of them asked questions. Their friend needed help, so they came. The first thing they did was free Ember from the act she had been playing. The dragon rose to her full height, her scales blazing gold in the darkness. When she opened her mouth, fire poured out like a river of light. The flames were hot enough to melt Nexari armor, hot enough to turn their weapons to slag. The Nexari screamed and ran. They had expected frightened students, not a dragon with fury in her eyes. But fire alone would not win this fight. That was where the others came in. Vok moved through the corridors like a ghost. His bioluminescent skin could produce blinding flashes of light. Every time the Nexari tried to aim their weapons, Vok would burst into brilliance, and they would stumble back, unable to see. Shen was a warrior. His species had been fighting wars for thousands of years, and he had been trained since childhood in Korathi combat techniques. Danny had also taught him something called wrestling, a human fighting style that involved grabbing and throwing. When the Nexari came close, Shen was there to meet them. Myra, the little Grellian engineer, had been building a device in her room. She called it a project, something to keep her busy when she was not studying. It turned out to be a fully working electromagnetic pulse generator. When she activated it, every Nexari weapon within 200 meters stopped working. And through it all, Danny was the center. He was not the strongest fighter or the smartest planner, but he was the one they all trusted. He told them where to go and when to move. He put himself in danger to protect them. When Vok was cornered, Danny ran into the line of fire to save him. When Danny lost his weapon, Shen appeared at his side without being called. They moved like one creature with many bodies. They did not need to speak to understand each other. They simply knew. Zorath Ken watched the impossible battle unfold on his screens. 4 students and a dragon against 47 professional killers. It should have been a slaughter. It should have ended in seconds. Instead, it ended with the Nexari running for their ship. By the time the principal's reinforcements arrived, the fighting was over. The students had freed themselves and each other. Not one hostage had been killed. Zorath Ken found Danny in the medical center. The boy had a bandage on his arm and a dark bruise around his eye. He was laughing about something with Vok, while Shen rubbed healing cream on Ember's slightly burnt scales. Mira was already talking about improvements she could make to her device. How? The word burst out of Zorath Ken before he could stop it. How did you do this? Danny looked up at him, surprised. Do what? All of it. You had no training, no weapons, no plan. The next Sari should have killed you in the first minute. The logical outcome was impossible. You should all be dead. Danny thought about this for a moment. Then he smiled, that strange human expression that carried so much meaning. We weren't thinking about logic, sir. We were thinking about each other. He reached over and took Vok's hand. When someone you love is in danger, you don't calculate the odds. You just act. You do whatever it takes to keep them safe. But the risk, the danger, that's what friends do, Danny said simply. They protect each other, no matter what. Zorath Ken sat down heavily in the nearest chair. His four hearts were beating too fast. His mind was spinning with thoughts he could not organize. I don't understand, he admitted. Danny's smile grew softer. That's okay, sir. It took me a long time to understand, too. But you'll get there. He looked at Ember, who had turned her amber eyes toward the principal. Sometimes you just need someone to show you the way. The Velthari High Council did not make requests. They made demands. When the message arrived ordering Zorath Ken to appear before them, he knew what they wanted. The attack on the Academy had been a major security failure. The Council wanted explanations. They wanted someone to blame. They wanted to understand how their perfect system had broken down. Zorath Ken decided to give them something much more important instead. He brought Danny Cole and his dragon. The council chamber was a massive room at the heart of the Velthari home world. Its walls were made of living crystal that had grown for millions of years. The ceiling stretched so high that it disappeared into darkness. In the center sat 7 of the oldest and most powerful Velthari in existence. Their blue skin dark with age, and their 4 hands folded with perfect stillness. They had never seen a dragon before. Ember walked into the chamber with her head held high. Her scales caught the light from the crystal walls and threw it back in shades of green and gold. Her amber eyes looked at each council member in turn, calm and unafraid. High Council of Vreth, the oldest of the 7, broke the silence first. This is highly irregular, Principal. We summoned you to discuss the security breach at your academy. We did not ask for human curiosities. Zorath Ken stood before them without fear. With respect, High Counselor, the human and his companion are directly relevant to my report. Explain. I have served as principal of the Galactic Academy for 200 years. I have managed it according to Velthari principles of logic and efficiency. I have maintained order, achieved acceptable outcomes, and produced functional members of galactic society. I have followed every rule and met every standard our culture requires, as expected of you. And in all that time, Zorath Ken continued, I never once prevented a crisis. I managed them. I contained them. I filed reports about them. When the Nexari attacked my school, I had no solution. I could only watch and calculate and wait for death. He gestured to Danny, who stood straight and calm beside his dragon. This human prevented the attack. He did it with no weapons, no training, and no logical advantage. He did it through friendship. The word hung in the air. The council members shifted uncomfortably on their seats. Friendship is something we discarded long ago, Zorath Ken said. We called it a weakness. We believed that emotions clouded judgment and attachments led to poor decisions. We were wrong. High Counselor Vreth's voice was cold. You speak dangerously, Principal. I speak truthfully. Zorath Ken moved to stand beside Danny. Ember's tail curled around his ankle in a gesture of support. When this boy's friends were threatened, he fought for them without thinking about himself. He did not calculate the risks or consider the odds. He simply acted because he loved them. And they fought for him. Together, they accomplished what our security forces could not. He looked at each council member in turn. Humans are new to the galaxy. They have no telepathic powers or natural armor. They are not particularly strong or smart or long-lived. But they have something we have lost. They have the ability to form bonds so strong they will walk into fire for those they love. The chamber was silent. Crystal walls glowed with ancient light. 7 powerful beings sat frozen by words they had never expected to hear. I have served the Velthary Collective for 2 centuries, Zorthken continued. I have followed every rule and obeyed every directive. I have achieved every goal you set for me. And I have been empty. He placed one of his hands on Danny's shoulder. The boy looked up at him with surprise and warmth. I did not understand what I was missing until this human walked into my academy with a dragon at his side. He showed me something I had forgotten existed. He showed me what it means to truly care about another being. High Counselor Vreth spoke slowly. What exactly are you proposing? I am proposing that we learn from the humans. Not their technology. Not their tactics. Those things we already have. I am proposing that we learn from their hearts. Zorthken looked down at Ember, who gazed back at him with eyes full of ancient wisdom. I am proposing that we remember how to be friends. For a long moment, no one moved or spoke. The fate of everything hung in the balance. Then, to everyone's surprise, the youngest council member stood up. Her name was Vethsora, and she was barely 1,000 years old. I would like to meet the dragon, she said. Ember stood up and walked toward her. The council chamber held its breath as the dragon approached the Velthary woman. Vethsora extended one hand, trembling slightly. Ember pressed her snout against the palm and made her rumbling sound. Vethsora's expression changed. Her rigid composure softened. Something in her eyes became alive in a way it had not been before. She is warm, Vethsora whispered. I had forgotten what warmth felt like. One by one, the other council members rose from their seats. They approached the dragon with hesitant steps, each one extending a hand to touch her scales. And each one felt something they had not felt in centuries. High Counselor Vreth was the last to move. He was over 12,000 years old, the oldest Velthary still living. He had not felt an emotion since before most species in the galaxy had evolved. He placed his hand on Ember's head. The dragon looked up at him with her amber eyes. And something cracked in the ancient being's chest. Something that had been frozen for thousands of years began to thaw. A single tear ran down his blue cheek. Perhaps, he said slowly, we've been wrong about some things. 3 years later, Danny Cole graduated from the Galactic Academy with the highest honors ever given to a student in interspecies relations. A new department that Zorthken himself had created. The graduation ceremony was unlike anything the Academy had ever seen. Students from 100 different species mixed together without fear or hatred. Velthary talked and laughed with beings they would have ignored a few years before. In the center of it all stood a golden dragon, accepting scratches and pets from everyone who approached. Zorthken gave the commencement address. He spoke about friendship and bonds that crossed every boundary. He spoke about a boy who had arrived at his academy with nothing but kindness and a dragon, and changed everything. After the ceremony, Danny found him on the observation deck. Good speech, sir. Zorthken smiled. It still felt strange on his face, but he had grown comfortable with it. I had an excellent teacher. They stood in silence, watching the stars. Ember curled between them, her warmth connecting them like a bridge. What will you do now? Zorthken asked. Keep going, Danny said. Keep making friends. There's a whole galaxy out there that needs to learn what we've learned. He reached out his hand in the human gesture of farewell. Zorthken took it with 2 of his own. Ember wrapped her tail around them both. Somewhere in the galaxy, another lonely being was looking at the stars and wondering if anyone would ever understand them. Somewhere, another wall was waiting to crack open. And somewhere, Another friendship was about to begin, because of a human, a dragon, and a principal who finally understood what truly mattered. The stars seemed brighter than ever before.